Chairman and CEO and the Harris Poll Chairman, Mark Penn.
Chairman and
Mark,
CEO and the Harris Poll
It's great
Chairman,
to see you this
Mark
morning.
Penn.
Thank you so much
Mark,
for being here. And you've been
it's great to
doing
see
your
you this
own
morning. Thank you so
polling,
much for
very,
being here.
and you've been doing your polling. Your thoughts on what's going on with the Democrats, right?
Good polling. Your thoughts on what's going
Right
on
now.
with the Democrats right
Well, the Democrats have fallen off a cliff. I haven't seen anything like this.
Have fallen off a cliff.
Although you can go back to 1972 when they got one state.
Although you can go back to
Or
1984
when they got one state.
when they got one state.
Look, the Democratic policies
really
put the Democrats in a hole. And I think in retrospect, they're looking at the Biden presidency internationally.
I don't know how he was president.
Inflation
He
at
was weak
home.
internationally.
He left the
He
border
caused inflation
open.
at home.
He didn't do anything
I
about
think
crime.
In retrospect,
I think that in retrospect, people are looking back and they're wondering how on earth did they even vote Democratic? And that is a really big problem
not the
for this
leadership.
party.
You heard what Tim
Well,
Walz
not
just
the
said.
leadership. You heard what Tim Walz just said. We're going to put these policies in. We're going to stand.
That the Republicans set the tone for immigration. No, they didn't. Joe Biden had a wide open border. The Democrats set the tone for illegal migrants coming into the country, not the Republicans. They fought about it all the way.
Yeah, I really don't know what planet he's on. Frankly, he's not really likely to be Democratic leadership unless the Democratic Party drives itself down to a single state again. I think on border politics and border policy, that is where President Trump is getting his highest ratings, near 60%, high 50s. He closed the border rapidly. People see all the things that the Biden administration was saying about the border to have been nonsense, frankly.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. You walk around the streets of New York and suddenly it feels better, right? With all of those people now on planes to El Salvador and Venezuela. But look, it's not just Tim Walz, right? A new CNN poll reveals that Democrats think New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez best reflects the core values of the party. 10% of Democrats support AOC. Former VP Kamala Harris is coming in a close second. 8% of those polled named Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders as the leader. These are all the leading leftists of the party. These are all those, very aggressive policies. Some Democrats are even pushing AOC to primary New York Senator Chuck Schumer after he voted for the bill which prevented a government shutdown, Mark.
Look, I think Schumer did the right thing in standing up against a government shutdown. It would have been a catastrophe for the Democrats. And look at those numbers, 10%. Generally, when there are party leaders, that's acknowledged by 30, 40, or even 50%. So I think AOC and Bernie Sanders are a long way from being the real leaders of the party. I don't think you could say there is a leader of the Democratic Party at this point. I don't think there will be one until the presidential primaries. And at that point, the party is either going to pick another McGovern or they're going to pick a Bill Clinton. And that's going to make a big difference in where this party goes and what it stands for.
I want to get your take on the signal catastrophe or signal, upset at the White House. President Trump called out the CEO of NPR, Catherine Mayer, for being a sitting board member of Signal and the messaging app. at, Mark. You posted this on X. Seriously, you think that Jeffrey Goldberg got added to a high-level national security conversation by chance? The chance that this was done by an operative looking to embarrass the administration is about 90%. The chance someone added him because they were looking for another Jeffrey is about 10%. Tell us more, Mark. What are you saying here?
Well, look, I was speculating There that most of these things really just don't happen by chance. That wow, how did Jeffrey Goldberg wind up on that? I don't think it's been clarified. I think Trump has said it was a staff member. I think Waltz took responsibility there that most of these things really just don't happen by chance. That wow, how did Jeffrey Goldberg wind up on that? I don't think it's been clarified. I think Trump has said it was a staff member. I think Waltz took responsibility. We still don't know exactly how this happened. I think that I was expressing suspicion based on my experience and what we all said, like about the Wuhan virus. It obviously was the lab. So we'll see exactly how this happened. Boy, I wish Jeffrey Goldberg had been a stand-up journalist and said, you know what, these are confidential, high-level matters. I have no business being on this. I'm just going to take myself off. And that would have been the appropriate thing for journalists to do. Not, oh, great, I got access to confidential information I shouldn't have. And look, the people in it should have been using some other app. I think that it's time that government reform its communication system so that it has something that's secure and easy to use. As signal, but this, nobody was right here.
Yeah, I mean, there is this Alex Wong at the center of this Signagate scandal, if you want to call it that. He is the Chinese deputy national security advisor appointed by President Trump. He's at the center of this. He's married to U.S. Attorney Candace Chu Wong, a Chinese woman who was one of the key attorneys involved in prosecuting January 6ers. That's interesting. Alex Wong and his wife, these Chinese nationals who are working, Chinese deputy national security. I mean, I assume they're American citizens, obviously. But he was appointed by the president to serve as the assistant to the president and the principal deputy national security advisor. Do you know if he put the people in the chat?
No, I certainly don't know. And look, I think there has to be an investigation. All they're saying is, in my experience, that, chance rarely happens to be the case that someone like Jeffrey Goldberg, who is a national, security defense reporter from the Atlantic, gets accidentally placed on. It could have happened by accident. I really want to get to the facts here, and I hope there is an investigation. Whether or not it was somebody who did something deliberate, I'm sure the actual people in the call really certainly meant no harm.
Mm-hmm. What do you think should happen here?
Look, I think investigate it. I don't think anybody meant any harm, and let's move on. And okay. I think Trump officials will learn. Hey, this is not how you have these high-level conversations, and I won't do it again. Let's close this chapter. It's not really relevant to the foreign policy that was executed.
That's right.
That President Trump ordered.
And that's the bottom line. The operation went. Very successfully. Mark, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir. Very successfully. Mark, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
lawsuit to be dismissed. Well, now Jay-Z attempt to get this case thrown out. Lawsuit to be dismissed. Well, now Jay-Z is continuing his own lawsuit against Tony Buzbee and his filing that we're going to talk about, and a declaration, a sworn statement from Jay-Z himself. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. Okay, so another line in the sand has been drawn between Jay-Z and his current arch nemesis Tony Buzbee, the Texas lawyer who represented a woman that, up until, just last week, had been suing the rapper and Sean Combs for allegedly sexually assaulting her back in 2000 at a VMA's after party in New York. When she was just 13 years old. I said up until recently because Buzbee just voluntarily dismissed that case last week. Not entirely clear the reasoning, but what is clear is Jay-Z and his legal team, they were pushing back on a number of her claims, particularly after an investigation from NBC uncovered potential holes in her story, from her father saying he doesn't recall picking her up after this alleged attack, to perhaps issues with her recall regarding the presence of a jumbotron outside of the Radio City Music Hall, where she says she was picked up and then taken to this party where she was abused, or the fact that there might have been issues with her recollection about talking to Benji Madden at this after party. So again, a lot of issues in her story. Not sure if that's the reason that this case was ultimately dismissed, or maybe, as I said before in a prior sidebar, maybe she didn't want to be part of this litigation anymore. Maybe she didn't want to go through it, having a spotlight on her claims. Whatever the case may be, this case was dismissed. And because of those apparent inconsistencies or issues, Jay-Z and his team, they petitioned the court to sanction Tony Buzbee for essentially starting a litigation without, what they claim, fully doing the proper due diligence into her claims. And now this leads me into what I want to talk about today. The fact that Jay-Z has separately filed a lawsuit against Tony Buzbee and his firm. They're suing for defamation, extortion, intentional infliction of emotional distress, essentially arguing that Buzbee made false allegations against him that hurt his reputation and business, and that he initially tried to blackmail the rapper into paying up before going public with Jane Doe's claims. This is a lawsuit we've talked about before, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about it, but these are the essential allegations. Now, what do we want to talk about here? Well, something that we haven't talked about yet. Before that dismissal from last week, Jay-Z filed a very important motion that we want to talk about that maybe was possibly strengthened by the dismissal of Jane Doe's lawsuit. This is a response. Actually, it's more of an opposition to Tony Buzbee's attempt to dismiss this lawsuit. You see, Tony Buzbee had essentially tried to dismiss this lawsuit against him and his firm through California's anti-SLAPP law. What's that? Anti-strategic lawsuits against public participation. So under the law, certain lawsuits can be dismissed if they are just an attempt to chill someone's First Amendment right to free speech. In other words, there shouldn't be lawsuits where the main intention is to silence criticism, right? Makes sense. That's what Jay-Z claims Tony Buzbee was going for here, trying to get the rapper's suit against him tossed on anti-SLAPP grounds, okay? Now, Sean Carter, Jay-Z, argued in his opposition, that doesn't work here, doesn't apply. Quote, plaintiff Sean Carter has filed well-pleaded claims against defendants Anthony Buzbee and the Buzbee law firm for civil extortion, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The amended complaint alleges, and there is no dispute, that right after Sean Combs was charged with drugging and raping men, women, and children who attended his parties, Buzbee launched a nationwide publicity campaign to attract Combs' victims as his clients. Buzbee claimed that other high-profile entertainers had participated in Combs' criminal acts and threatened to expose and pursue criminal proceedings against them. Now, this is referring, of course, to the fact that Tony Buzbee held now an infamous press conference announcing his plan to file multiple lawsuits on behalf of multiple Sean Combs accusers, which he has done. And Combs, of course, is subject to a myriad of sexual assault lawsuits, currently locked up in federal detention, awaiting trial on criminal charges of racketeering, transportation to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking. Hey everybody, this is another law on crime legal alert. The Los Angeles wildfires, they are still making an impact. It is estimated that these wildfires caused more than $250 billion worth of damage. The loss of life is just immeasurable. Damage. The loss of life is just immeasurable. There are reports, though, that insurance companies canceled thousands of homeowners' fire policies in the months before the wildfires. Were those cancellations even legal? Will insurance companies be able to help people recover everything that they lost? Well, I'll tell you what, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, they're here to help. They were there for the Northern California wildfires. They were there in Maui, and now they're here for you and the families affected by these horrific fires. So if you've lost loved ones, your home, your business, your property because of the Los Angeles wildfires, you can visit forthepeople.com/LCFire, and you may be entitled to significant compensation. Jay-Z's filing continues, quote, "To that end, Busby sent demand letters to Mr. Carter on behalf of two individuals who claim that Mr. Carter had participated in Combs' criminal enterprise. Busby threatened to publicly pursue Mr. Carter if he did not agree to provide, quote, something of substance to compensate his clients." That is the extortion claim that we're going to get into, but he continues, and this is important. Quote, "The key issue raised by Busby's motion is whether he can wrap himself in California's litigation privilege by claiming that his public and private threats to Mr. Carter were lawful acts in aid of potential litigation. He cannot." Now, litigation privilege, generally speaking, is the concept that you can't sue lawyers for statements they make in connection with litigation. I mean, if you think about it, if there wasn't that protection, then there would be really no lawsuits, right? Any defendant in a lawsuit would turn around and sue opposing counsel. Of course, the other side doesn't agree with allegations. They say they're false. That's every lawsuit. That's the point of a lawsuit. One side makes claims, the other denies it, and you fight it out in court. You can't be liable for statements that you make in connection with the case. Otherwise, again, it would chill litigation. However, according to Jay-Z and his legal team, this is different. Quote, "Where Busby crossed the line, and what sets this case apart from most pre-litigation threats, is that he not only threatened civil litigation against Mr. Carter if he did not pay his clients, but criminal proceedings and a public spectacle as well. That renders his conduct extortion as a matter of law and bars him from invoking the anti-SLAPP statute." Busby's defense is that he threatened criminal proceedings only in the public statements and didn't repeat them in his demand letters to Mr. Carter. But the law draws no such distinction. Busby's statements must be taken in their entirety, and his demand letters to Mr. Carter and letters to Mr. Carter must be read in context. To hold otherwise would reward clever extortionists. So now let's expand on all this. Jay-Z argues that Busby laid the groundwork for his alleged extortion by going public and saying that his firm represents over 120 people who claim they abuse Combs, and that, quote, many other individuals will be implicated, that he would allow his clients to work with authorities, including the FBI, and then he starts representing Jane Doe in her case against him and Combs, and simultaneously Jay-Z claims that Busby is making these public statements that, the Combs indictment will grow, and that those close to Combs should be prosecuted and put underneath the jail, and those kinds of comments. And that's what he's alleging sets the groundwork for his extortion claim. And then he goes in, more specifically, into the alleged extortion, where he claims that Tony Busby and his firm sent him demand letters before he was named in Jane Doe's lawsuit, before he was revealed as Celebrity A. Quote, on November 5th, defendants privately sent the extortion demands to Mr. Carter on behalf of two clients, Jane Doe and John Doe. The letters accused him of raping both individuals when they were minors. Busby warned that the only way to avoid a public spectacle was for Mr. Carter to provide his clients something of substance in settlement. Busby also threatened to pursue Mr. Carter for supposed crimes that Busby had not even identified on behalf of persons he did not represent, saying, quote, it has been my experience that when someone does this to a victim once, the likelihood is they have done the same or similar things to others. Busby's accusations are categorically false, but the extortion demands, combined with Busby's prior public threats, sent a clear message to Mr. Carter: pay up or face criminal charges and public condemnation. But Jay-Z claims that instead of caving to these demands, he filed his lawsuit on November 18th against Tony Busby. Actually, I'll tell you, he filed it anonymously at first, and then that's when Busby named Jay-Z in Jane Doe's complaint. By the way, you heard about John Doe so far. Never been a lawsuit filed by Tony Busby by a John Doe against Jay-Z regarding sexual assault. That comes up later. We'll talk about it. But he adds in this filing, Jay-Z, quote, on December 10th, Busby went even further in a statement to TMZ. Busby said he's not ruling out filing rape charges with New York authorities. Busby also said that Jay-Z's rape accuser might take the music mogul's advice and file a criminal complaint against him after slapping him with a civil suit. And then, of course, we know about the NBC reporting that seemed to cast some discrepancies in Jane Doe's account. And then, of course, the case was dismissed. So that's the backstory of it all. Now we're going to get into the law about whether or not Tony Busby is in fact protected by California's anti-SLAPP law. Let me rephrase that. Whether or not, according to Jay-Z and his legal team, Tony Busby is protected. And according to this filing, it is a two-step process. First, it has to be established that what Busby is being sued for, or what he's being sued in connection with, the statements, are protected activity. That's the first step. The second step is that Jay-Z would have to show the court that if you take the facts as true, he would win this case. So let's start with step one, where Jay-Z claims that Busby and his firm can't meet that burden, that there is no protected activity here. Quote, their threats to publicly accuse Mr. Carter of being a child rapist, coupled with their public threats of criminal prosecution, constitute extortion, which is unprotected speech. Extortionate threats dressed up as pre-litigation demand letters are undeserving of the protection of the anti-SLAPP statute. Actually, they define what extortion is in the criminal code. Extortion is the act of obtaining money or property from another through the wrongful use of force or fear. And Jay-Z argues that Busby's statements leading up to the demand letters, things like the day will come when we will name names other than Sean Combs, and where he warned that his clients would speak to the FBI because they have some very important things to say, and that under the jail comment I mentioned before, all that sets the context of this alleged extortion. And Jay-Z claims that Busby's subsequent demand letters are a clear form of extortion. Quote, in the context of Busby's public threats to refer his targets to law enforcement and his private threats to hunt for other criminal acts involving parties unrelated to his clients, told Mr. Carter that he should fear a criminal prosecution. Busby continued his public criminal threats, promising to encourage all of his clients to speak to the authorities. These were threats to publicly accuse of rape and to disclose criminal activity against victims who were not even Busby's clients unless Mr. Carter paid his clients substantial sums. That is extortion and beyond the pale of permissible pre-litigation conduct. And Jay-Z cites case law in support of that, specifically one California case where he explains how a lawyer, in this case, was sued for extortion because of a demand letter that the lawyer apparently sent to the plaintiff on behalf of a woman who claimed that the plaintiff had raped her. And the court said that this was extortion because the lawyer warned that unless plaintiff settles, he would expose information to the IRS and other authorities, that he would uncover additional causes of action against the plaintiff once the lawsuit was filed, and expose information to the media worldwide and expose any violation by plaintiff to the appropriate authorities. And then also that the lawyer threatened to accuse the plaintiff of raping this woman unless the plaintiff paid for her silence. And Jay-Z's legal team argues that that case is exactly the same thing here, that, quote, Busby did the same. Now, apparently Busby cited cases to defend himself in a prior filing, but Jay-Z's legal team says those cases don't apply here because in one case, the lawyer didn't threaten to report the lawyer's target to authorities. And in another case, the lawyer simply suggested that his client would aggressively defend himself in litigation. And that's very different with what Busby is being accused of now. And what Busby, though, I will say, may suggest and how he may defend himself is by arguing, look, I never directly threatened to go to law enforcement unless you pay. It wasn't as explicit and clear as maybe that other case. Wonder if that's an argument that will be advanced or has been advanced. But from there, we move on to the next point. From there, we move on to the litigation privilege argument, which I mentioned before. So Jay-Z's legal counsel writes that in order to determine if a pre-litigation or demand letter is protected under the anti-SLAPP, free speech law, you have to see whether it was made in good faith contemplation of imminent litigation, rather than just some nebulous, hollow threat of litigation. There has to be imminent litigation that's coming up, and that's why you made this demand letter. There is a difference there. Here, Jay-Z argues Busby and his firm, they can't prove that this was done in a good faith pursuit of real imminent litigation. Why? They argue that Busby's declaration that he made under penalty of perjury, his own statement, my firm and two of
There's a fly on me. Now the fly's on you.
No.
Have you ever wondered, am I the asshole? Welcome to Who's the
own statement. My firm and two of our clients were prepared to assert civil claims against Carter. The letters were sent in serious good faith anticipation of litigation. Jay-Z says that declaration, that statement, that is self-serving. It's not enough. Also, Jay-Z says that Busby and his firm, they haven't shown that they were contemplating imminent litigation. Quote, defendants sent the John Doe extortion demand 3 months ago, but they never sued on his behalf. Their inaction exposes that letter for what it is, a hollow threat of litigation. So far, this was all about the first step in the anti-SLAPP analysis, right? To see whether or not Tony Busby has some sort of protection. Again, trying to show that Busby and his firm's conduct is not protected because Jay-Z claims this is all extortion. Now we move on to step two. So not only was that conduct, according to them, not protected, but now Jay-Z claims he can show he will prevail on the merits, the substance of this case. Again, if he can show that anti-SLAPP doesn't apply and that he's going to win, this case shouldn't be dismissed. So how does he argue that he's going to win on the actual merits of his claims? Well, first, Jay-Z lays out the standard. Quote, a court may grant an anti-SLAPP motion based on the litigation privilege only if the defendant defeats defendant's evidence as a matter of law. And here, Jay-Z claims the defendants cannot meet that burden. As established above, defendants failed to make even a prima facie showing that the John Doe extortion demand was a good faith pre-litigation demand. Courts routinely deny anti-SLAPP motions, whereas here, the defendant fails to show that the litigation privilege applies as a matter of law. Then Jay-Z goes through each of his causes of action, and he says, I'm going to win them. So first, Jay-Z argues I'll prevail on my extortion claim that, quote, defendants committed extortion as a matter of law. Quote, defendants argue that Mr. Carter's claim fails because he didn't lose any property. That is, he stood up to the extortion. And he can't allege the elements of fraud, meaning the threats were false. But Jay-Z claims that's not the law. According to Jay-Z and his legal counsel, you don't need to actually transfer property to prove extortion. It's the threat with intent to extort money that's key, not if the money was actually paid up. That's not what matters. And he also argues that it's not required that Busby's threats be false. That is why he says his extortion claim is going to be successful. Then he talks about the defamation claim, and he says he will be successful there as well. Now, defamation is a false statement about someone that was made to another that damages that person's reputation or harms them. And when you're dealing with public figures like a celebrity, you need to show actual malice, that the statement was made knowing it wasn't true, or it was made with reckless disregard for the truth, that you didn't even do the proper due diligence, even research to make sure it was true. So first, there seems to be some discrepancy on whether the statements made by Tony Busby were even about Jay-Z or, quote, of and concerning Jay-Z. But Jay-Z claims that Busby and his firm, they don't dispute that certain statements qualify, that they're about him, but they argue that other statements made in October and November do not reference Jay-Z. Now, I was looking at this. It seems that what they're referring to is October statements from Busby seem to be October 1st press conference, where he allegedly said that he vowed to, quote, find the silent accomplices and expose the enablers, and that he intended to make available to the authorities, specifically to the FBI. October 2nd, on a podcast, Tony Busby allegedly pledged to ferret out all the people involved, facilitated Combs' misconduct, and to hold them accountable in civil and criminal cases. October 7th, on the Sean Atwood podcast, he allegedly stated that there are going to be some people named in these cases that are going to raise some eyebrows. November 14th, in a film produced by TMZ, Busby allegedly stated that those who attended Combs' parties are just as guilty. Again, I believe those are the statements, or the statements that are likely being referred to by Jay-Z. But he argues that despite Busby saying that his past comments are not about Jay-Z, Jay-Z says that's not true. That's wrong. Jay-Z's counsel writes that it's really up to a jury or a judge to determine whether a statement is about Jay-Z or not for Tony Busby to decide. And that courts, they look at the totality of the circumstances. And that is when we get our mention of none other than Bill Cosby. Yeah, the comedian, entertainer who was convicted and then released from prison for drugging and sexually assaulting a woman. Well, in the filing, it references one of the many women who accused Bill Cosby of sexual misconduct. And it reads, Dickinson was one of many women who publicly accused Bill Cosby of sexual misconduct. She sued for defamation based on Cosby's statements, some of which
with the help of
Cosby's statements, some of which mentioned her by name, some of which did not. The court held that the latter statements were nonetheless actionable. These statements referred to members of a reasonably ascertainable group of women who had recently accused Cosby of sexual misconduct, of which Dickinson was a known member. Given Busby's extensive media crusade, his defamatory statements were reasonably understood by his audience to refer to Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter is one of only two people who Busby had publicly accused of rape. And on November 19th, Busby confirmed that his public statements had referred to Mr. Carter. Busby liked an ex-user's post that identified Mr. Carter as Celebrity A in Jane Doe's complaint. On December 10th, Busby publicly accused Mr. Carter of rape by name. It is no defense that Busby's statements identifying Mr. Carter were made subsequent to those that do not identify him. Next, Jay-Z's legal team argues that the false statements are defamatory per se, meaning on their face they are so bad you can see how harmful they would be to somebody's reputation. Quote, defendants' false statements are defamatory per se because they accuse Mr. Carter of committing crimes of moral turpitude. Such accusations are defamatory on their face as they expose Mr. Carter to public hatred, contempt, ridicule, and disgrace. Statements that falsely impute criminal conduct are defamation per se. From there, Jay-Z responds to Busby's argument that the statements are not defamatory because they're just opinions. Well, Jay-Z responds to that, and he basically makes the argument, if you're making a statement that makes an assertion of fact that can be proven false, it's not an opinion. Quote, Busby asserted quote, Busby asserted that Mr. Carter facilitated sexual misconduct, should be prosecuted and put underneath the jail, is among the people on a long list of names who are going to be named in these cases, alleging sexual misconduct and committed sexual assault. These are not opinions because they can be proven true or false. In other words, these are not opinions because they can be proven true or false, meaning these are statements that declare or imply that Jay-Z committed a crime. This, according to Jay-Z, is actionable defamation. And also, by the way, Jay-Z denies these claims, says they are false in a declaration, which we'll get to and highlight in a moment. But the reporting from NBC News, by the way, on Jay Doe's claims, again, this is before this case was dismissed too. They highlight the NBC reporting as to why this is all not true. But finally, with respect to proving actual malice as a part of defamation, Jay-Z highlights the deficiencies in Jane Doe's accusations that Busby allegedly relied on another law firm to first vet the claims, that he never even met with Jane Doe before signing his name to the complaint. That's the allegation. Quote, Busby's conduct demonstrates willful blindness and a reckless disregard for the falsity of the accusation. So Jay-Z says he will win on the defamation claim too. And then from there, he moves on to the final claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress. He argues I'll win on that too, because for intentional infliction of emotional distress, you need to prove that someone's conduct is extreme and outrageous, that there was an intent to cause distress, and that that victim suffered extreme or severe emotional distress. And here, Jay-Z responds to Tony Busby's apparent defense that the conduct wasn't outrageous, because Jay-Z responds by arguing, Busby accused me of raping 2 minors. It's pretty outrageous. And Jay-Z claims that this alleged conduct by Tony Busby, these alleged false accusations, they exceed all bounds of what is usually tolerated in a civilized community. And from there, he fights back against Tony Busby's apparent defense claim that the rapper can't prove he suffered severe distress. Well, Jay-Z responds to that as well. Quote, the public spectacle that defendants threatened and then created has caused Mr. Carter to suffer mental anguish, given the knowledge that Busby is trying to maliciously destroy his livelihood, his family, and continue to feel mental anguish about the ticking time bomb that Busby planted. This is more than sufficient. So, because Jay-Z says Busby's statements are not protected, and because Jay-Z claims he will prevail on his overall case, quote, for the foregoing reasons, the court should deny defendant's motion, meaning don't dismiss this case. Let's move on. All right. Now, there is one more thing I got to mention, because as part of this filing, there is also a declaration from Jay-Z himself, Sean Carter, making a series of statements under penalty of perjury. And these are used as supporting evidence to the arguments made in the opposition, the one I just went over. Like the claim, for example, that the rape claims are false and the belief that he was being extorted. Quote, these allegations, which I learned of for the first time through these demand letters, were shocking to me and have absolutely no basis in fact. I did not do what Mr. Busby and his clients accuse me of having done. I know that lawyers send demand letters, but these demand letters were different. They came on the heels of Mr. Busby's wildly disseminated public accusations that he was going after people in the music business that he claimed had participated in Mr. Combs' crimes. Then he sent me the 2 letters that specifically accused me of having participated in Mr. Combs' criminal conduct. I was deeply concerned that if I did not pay his clients something of substance, that Mr. Busby intended to create a public spectacle and take his clients to criminal authorities to convince them to prosecute me. I didn't think there was any other way to read those letters. It's not as if he assured me in the letters that he that he was no longer planning to take his clients to the FBI or other law enforcement authorities to pursue criminal proceedings against me, he was still saying that. As a result, I took Mr. Busby's demand letters to communicate to me that if I did not agree with the next 2 weeks to ultimately pay his clients substantial amounts of money, he would falsely brand me in the media as a child rapist, file lawsuits against me claiming falsely that I had done these horrible things, and attempt to bring the criminal justice system down on me by having his clients make false accusations against me to the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. It is no exaggeration that I view this as an existential threat to my reputation, my career, my family, and everything else I have spent my life achieving. And because it was all predicated on completely false accusations, I considered Mr. Busby to be blackmailing me. I felt enormous pressure to protect my family from what Mr. Busby threatened and to preserve my professional reputation. I felt mental anguish knowing someone, Mr. Busby, was attempting to maliciously destroy me, my livelihood, and my family. I felt that Mr. Busby was placing a gun to my head, that I either bow to his demands or endure personal and financial ruin. His actions caused me mental anguish about the ticking time bomb and what it would do to me, my family, and my hard-earned reputation. And from there, he also seems to provide additional detail on that negotiation. Quote, I refuse to be intimidated or extorted by Mr. Busby. After receiving his demand letters, my lawyer contacted Mr. Busby's firm to find contacted Mr. Busby's firm to find out information regarding his Doe clients and the basis for their false allegations. Mr. Busby's associate refused to provide any information about their false allegations unless I signed a non-disclosure agreement. Mr. Busby himself never returned the call. Then Jay-Z talks about the impact this has had on him, which is important when you consider damages, when you consider proving harm and severe distress for the purposes of defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was incredibly painful for my wife and me to sit down with our children, one of whom is at an age where her friends would surely see the press and ask questions about these claims, and explain this. I mourn this loss of innocence for my children, including one who is around the age that the female minor claims to have been when she falsely claims these heinous acts happen. I am heartbroken that my children have to endure hearing these things about their father, especially at their young age. Although my utmost priority is my family, I was also concerned about the impact these false accusations would have on my career, and more importantly, the negative effect it would have on all the people who work with me. I know that false allegations, like the ones Mr. Busby has levied against me, can be career-ending and threaten to destroy what I've worked so hard to build. Mr. Busby's actions undermine my relationship and my company Rock Nation's relationship with other businesses in the sports and entertainment space. We have agreements to produce entertainment programs for certain sporting events. After Mr. Busby filed the lawsuit, the media reported that other businesses could end their deals with Rock Nation and forced one to speak out and address whether these false allegations would end our business relationship. Immediately after Mr. Busby went public with his false accusations, my company Rock Nation also lost other contracts in the sports and entertainment space that would have generated revenues of approximately $20 million per year. Again, damages, what did you lose? And he goes on to say, I was harshly criticized by others for accompanying my daughter to the premiere of her movie a day after Mr. Busby filed the Jane Doe lawsuit against me. This is The Lion King. Media outlets reported that Disney was hesitant over my attendance at the premiere because of the accusations. I feel that Mr. Busby purposely filed this lawsuit on the eve of my daughter's premiere to put me in the position of having to choose between supporting my daughter or hiding to avoid the negative press coverage. And there's a lot more that he states in this declaration, but you get the general idea. Look, big development. We will see how this affects the case and whether or not this case will move forward. We will continue to follow it for you here on Sidebar. But that is all we have for you right now. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your